Hence why Ruben Amorim was very, very pointed in the fact, I only want players who want to play for this club. It doesn't matter whether there's Champions League football or not. It's their job to get United back into the Champions League and back challenging. So he wants people to go on that journey rather than be at the destination.
Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and we are joined once again, it's that time of the year, by Dharmesh Sheth, Sky Sports News reporter. Dharmesh, how you doing, mate?
I'm all right. That time of year again. God, get chills.
It's exciting.
It feels like yesterday when it closed.
I know. I love it, right? I know that it's stressful and there's a lot going on. And obviously for you, everything sort of ramps up and you're sending your texts and you're trying to decipher what's true, what's not, who's trying to trick you. It's probably a lot trickier job for you than it is for us because we just get to report on all this. We just get to be excited by all of this. So obviously your job, I'm sure, has got very stressful over the last few weeks.
I wouldn't say stressful. It is exciting as well.
Yeah.
Because this is going to be a big window. I mean, you can already tell it is.
Yeah.
So many clubs are doing business, and there seems to be like 4 different windows in this one big window, if you like. I mean, there's one's already opened and closed, and everyone thought, oh, right, that's deadline day, because we went quite big on it on Sky Sports News last week. And then they said, right, the window's closed. It will open again in 6 days. What?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, right, okay.
And whilst it was closed, Liverpool signed, or basically agreed the deal for Florian Wirtz, kind of, ignoring the whole window concept entirely anyway. But United have had a pretty busy start to the window, obviously signing Matheus Cunha instantly. That's already done. We don't even need to talk about that one. And then the next step was Bryan Mbeumo, because this deal was first discussed, I think we're looking at 2 weeks ago now. It was 2 weeks Wednesday since United put that first bid in. As it stands, there hasn't been a second bid. And then the last thing we've heard over the last few days is these sort of encroaching reports that Tottenham are keen. Obviously, Thomas Frank has gone from Brentford to Tottenham. He would probably quite like his best player from Brentford to go with him. What's your understanding on United's approach for Bryan Mbeumo and, crucially, Tottenham's approach for Bryan Mbeumo?
I mean, as far as we know, this is where we stand with it. United have made one bid. £45 million initial payment plus £10 million performance-related add-on, so a package of around £55 million, which has been rejected. And I think Manchester United were expecting that one to be rejected. We expect them to go back in with an improved offer, but it won't be one of these situations where it's going to be second bid, third bid, fourth bid, fifth bid. Right. Well, at least I don't think it will be. The first bid is there. It's been rejected, and that will be the base of the negotiation. So now what happens? The two clubs will continue to talk and get to a figure where both clubs are going to be happy with. And then the structure of that deal will be discussed. How much will be paid in each installment? Over how many years will that fee be paid as well? Now, up until Thomas Frank came to Tottenham Hotspur, it seemed like the green light all the way for Bryan Mbeumo to Manchester United, because he had other offers. And it's our understanding he's turned down other offers because he wants to go to Manchester United. I don't think fundamentally that has changed. We still think that he still wants to go to Manchester United. Now, the Thomas Frank situation has added a little bit of, I would say, how would you describe it? Jeopardy, let's say, to the United deal. But having even said that, you've got a situation here where we think that Mbeumo, yes, he's intrigued by Tottenham Hotspur. Yes, they've got Champions League football. They've got a manager he knows really, really well who's got the best out of him. However, it's our understanding that Manchester United are aware of all of this interest from Tottenham Hotspur, but they're pretty relaxed. And what United's approach in this transfer window is, and it should have been like for years and years anyway, is they will have a price in their mind. And so if it's going to get silly, I don't think they're going to get involved in any kind of bidding war for Bryan Mbeumo, even though they do desperately want to bring him to the football club. But they're not going to pay silly money for him. They will have a price in mind. And it's probably one of those where Brentford will be delighted that there are reports and there is interest from Tottenham Hotspur, because they can create some sort of bidding war between the two clubs. As far as United are concerned, I think they're pretty comfortable with the fact that Bryan Mbeumo wants to go to United. So that's, I think, where we stand at the moment. Is there a chance he won't go to United? Of course there is. There's always that chance, because this is how transfers work. But I think they can be as confident as they can be at this stage that the player wants to go to United and United need to sort out a price with Brentford.
I think that's the crucial part of this, isn't it? Because if Bryan Mbeumo's already rejected offers, and I think it was David Ornstein in that initial report that I think Arsenal had shown some interest, Newcastle as well. I think Newcastle in particular, saw a lot of Newcastle fans sort of struggling to process the news, let's say, that Bryan Mbeumo fancied joining Man United. It seems as though Tottenham... Obviously, the Thomas Frank draw is interesting, but Tottenham would be sort of maybe the lowest on the list of who a player might typically want to join out of some of the names that we've seen mentioned. I think if he still wants to join United, that's the crucial thing, isn't it? As long as he's not wavering on that. I just wonder, a couple of other questions on this. There were some mixed reports that Tottenham had put a bid in. Around 70 million was a number that had been sort of thrown around, that Tottenham have gone for this, they put a bid in for him. As far as your understanding, has Tottenham made an official bid for Bryan Mbeumo?
That's not the information we've got. I'm not saying that that's incorrect, that the report that came out, it was only one report. Yes. There wasn't many other people going with that story. Listen, it may have been one of those situations when is a bid. Yeah. Because you can go to a club and say, we'd be prepared to pay this much money for Bryan Mbeumo. Whereas, is it necessarily an official bid because it's not in writing, or is it a verbal bid that they would be prepared to say this is how much we'd be prepared to pay? One thing I would say when it comes to transfers, and listen, we know how sometimes it works. You hear about the word tapping up in the old sense of the word, but what I would say with all transfers, I don't think you're ever going to get a situation where a club makes a bid if they're not getting encouragement from somewhere that the player would want to join. There would be no point Manchester United working on a deal with Brentford for weeks and weeks and weeks and agreeing a deal with Brentford and thinking, right, we've got a deal agreed for Bryan Mbeumo, and then, right, let's try and get the player on board. And within a minute, if the player says, actually, I don't want to come, then all of that work is for nothing. There has to be some sort of encouragement somewhere for United to go to Brentford and say, this is how much we'd be prepared to pay. Now, this report will, as I said before, will work in Brentford's favour in one way, because if it's out there that it's around £70 million that Tottenham have bid or are prepared to pay, then if we were to think that that would be a figure that Brentford would likely accept, then in their minds, it's out there that this is how much Bryan Mbeumo is going to cost. Whereas if Manchester United feel confident that they can still get the player, but are sticking to what they believe the value of the player is, then there's going to have to be some sort of negotiation there. Because even if Tottenham made a bid and Brentford accepted it, it's not going to go anywhere if Bryan Mbeumo doesn't want to go to Tottenham. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's 100% the case, but that's just not going to happen. So Brentford could then go to United and say, well, he doesn't want to go to Tottenham, but we've agreed a fee with Tottenham and it's £70 million. So that's what you're going to have to pay. Whereas United could turn around and say, if that was the scenario, well, we know he wants to come to us. So we're not bidding against anyone anymore. So why would they go out and pay £70 million? Listen, it might end up being that figure, because we know how these transfer fees work. There's like initial payments, there's performance-related add-ons, all of this kind of thing. So let's see what United's next step is. But it's clear they want him. It's clear that they're still in talks. And that first bid has been rejected so far. Yeah,
and when you talk about not putting a bid in and not agreeing a deal for someone that doesn't want to join, I could potentially draw your attention back to September the 3rd, 2022, when many outlets wrote the story. Manchester United have agreed to pay Barcelona a guaranteed fee of €75 million for Frenkie de Jong. When that deal was done, and then did he join? No, because he didn't want to leave Barcelona. He didn't want to join Manchester United. So yeah, that's, hopefully we're doing things a different way
just
now.
Going back to that, and I can't believe we're still talking about Frenkie de Jong.
I thought it was done.
But with that in mind, earlier on in the window, I think United were getting encouragement that the player wanted to come. Hence why they spent all of that time trying to chase him.
Okay.
So that's what was happening. So like I said, it wasn't one of those situations where United blindly just went after him, and then after all those weeks of a window, even though it looked that way, all those weeks of that transfer window, De Jong said, actually, I don't want to go. Because I think they would have got encouragement that the player wanted to join United.
You'd hope so, at least. You'd hope so. You'd hope it wasn't just complete blind bidding and going with Barcelona.
Yeah.
Anyway, obviously, like I said, it's different people in charge. Hopefully we've learned our lesson from that kind of deal. Just moving on a little bit then. So Bryan Mbeumo, we expect a second bid to come in. I think that's been the case. We've sort of been locked in this bubble, haven't we, for a week or so now, where we're waiting for this second bid. Tottenham have shown interest, but we're not sure how much. United just need to get that deal done. Moving on to another player that's been a little bit... It's a slightly newer story, this one, with Hugo Ekitike. He's been a name that earlier in the window was linked with Liverpool. He's been linked with other teams in the Premier League. I'm sure you can go into that a little bit. Now it seems as though there's a little bit of momentum gathering around Manchester United. I think it was Sky Germany and yourselves that were reporting this. I think first, you're the first outlet I saw talk about United's interest in Hugo Ekitike. What's the current situation with that, and how keen are Man United on this guy?
I mean, look, United are interested. That the interest has gone as far as club-to-club contact, as far as we're aware.
Okay.
So United have made contact with Eintracht Frankfurt, and it's more that kind of contact is to do with exploring the conditions of a deal. What would it take, and what kind of salary? Not so much salary. What kind of transfer fee and what kind of instalment payment would it take to get Hugo Ekitike to Old Trafford? Now, again, with that in mind, there would be an element of the player in some quarters being open to a move to United, because United aren't going to go to Eintracht Frankfurt to explore the conditions of a deal unless they were getting some sort of encouragement somewhere that Ekitike may want to go to United. But listen, this very early in this one, because as you mentioned before, there are other clubs in the Premier League and in Europe who are interested in Ekitike. He's a wanted man. Now, United, I think, have been looking at him and tracking his progress for a number of years. He would fit the profile of the type of player that they'd want. He's a young player. He's had a bit of experience. He's a France under-21 international. I know some people will say, well, should United not be going for a more experienced player to help the likes of Xerxes and Rasmus Højlund? But United have got their plan. And I think with the Gyokeres deal, yes, there's interest there as well. But there's a lot of noise coming out of Portugal, which not just in recent days, but this was from the outset, when towards the end of last season, when it was thought that Gyokeres would leave Sporting, is that his preference was to go to a club who's going to be in the Champions League. Now, those reports and that approach from Gyokeres has resurfaced in Portugal. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but we're talking about media outlets who have got close connections to the player and to the football club as well. So I think what Ruben Amorim has said, and I remember this in a news conference during the season, and it was pretty pointed when he said, I only want players who want to come to Manchester United, regardless of whether there's European football or not. Now, he might have been speaking from a position of strength then, because there was still a chance that United could have been in the Champions League next season, because they were having that run in the Europa League. But there was always that chance, and as it transpired, they didn't win the Europa League final, that they weren't going to have Champions League football. Hence why Ruben Amorim was very, very pointed in the fact, I only want players who want to play for this club. It doesn't matter whether there's Champions League football or not. It's their job to get United back into the Champions League and back challenging. So he wants people to go on that journey rather than be at the destination, if you like. So I think he's been pretty strong on that, has Ruben Amorim. And maybe if Gyokeres is making those noises, then hence why we're hearing again now that the Ekitike one has reared its head. So it'd be interesting to see where United go with this. He's going to be really expensive, though, Ekitike. Probably be even more expensive than the likes of Gyokeres and Šeško. But I think United will try, and if they were to pursue this deal, they would try and do a deal whereby the payments would be over the length of his contract, like they do in a lot of deals, and try and negotiate down on that price. But definitely a player of interest, and definitely there's been contact.
It's interesting, isn't it? These names, and obviously he's not come out of nowhere. He's been a highly regarded youngster for some time, but he had that sort of, I would say, a failed move. I don't know if that's a little bit harsh, sort of less than ideal move to PSG, shall we say, Ekitike. But like, he's 22 years old and he's had a good season in the Bundesliga. I think it's 15 goals he got. But then you think they're talking 100 million euros. I mean, it feels a lot, doesn't it? You know, especially when you consider what Man United have sold their players for down the years. And I know 15, we'd kill for one of our players to score 15, but Rasmus Højlund got 15 goals for Man United last season. He got double digits Premier League goals. There was never a suggestion that we might fetch 80 million quid for him last summer. You know, I always think that, I'm not saying it's a United tax or whatever, I just feel as though certain clubs, and Frankfurt in particular, I think it was Jovic that they sold for, was it 65 million? They sold Kolo Muani for 90 million euros. Yeah. They've just sold Marmoush. Yeah, fair play indeed. Like there's certain teams like Benfica have got this knack of selling players for big money. Frankfurt have got this knack of selling players for big money. I think if United had a player that did what he'd done, and also, again, coming off a not very great spell at PSG, it'd take a lot more than a couple of decent seasons for him to be worth 100 million euros. But again, you know, we're the team that needs a striker, and they're the one that's got one. So I do get it. Just on Ekitike, there is this. You talk about Gyokeres and wanting European football, Champions League football specifically. There's loads of footage out there of Ekitike talking about. He essentially was a boyhood Man United fan, wasn't it? I think that's pretty plain to see.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's something that is being factored into United's approach for him? Not that he was a United fan, but that he would clearly be, you know, there'd be no question about his loyalty to the club if he was to join. And maybe, like you said, rather than seeing it as, right, I've landed, I've made it, I'm at Man United, he wants to take United back to where they should be. They see it as part of the journey rather than the destination. I can relax now, I'm here, and maybe, you know, don't have that sort of desire that we've seen over the last 10 years.
I mean, look, him being a United fan as a kid, it's not going to harm United's chances. But, I mean, things like that, do footballers really, really go to that extreme when it comes to their career? Because they've got to make sure it's right for their career. He's at this, nearer the start of his career, he's got to make sure that if it is United, it's going to be the right move for him. And United, of course, they're not going to be pursuing a player unless he actually does want to come, which the noises we're getting now, simply because, as I've explained before, how sometimes these transfers work, the fact that they have made an approach to Eintracht Frankfurt must mean somewhere with someone connected with Ekitike, he'd be open potentially to going to Old Trafford.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge, isn't it? I mean, let's look back at Gyokeres a little bit. You mentioned the European football thing, and like you said, that story has kind of either been, I don't know whether it's been put out again or whether it's just sort of been resurfaced, but it does feel as though the last we've heard about Gyokeres is that he won't mind playing for Arsenal, he won't mind a bit of Champions League football. What is not just United's interest in him, because that seems to be mixed. I think Amorim seems to be keen, others at the club maybe slightly less keen. But crucially, what are other clubs' interest in him? Because if Arsenal go for Šeško, if Liverpool go for someone else, or there's only so many clubs that need a striker right now. What is the situation with Gyokeres from United's perspective, but also general sort of European interest in him?
There is a lot of interest in him.
Okay.
That's not a surprise. United clearly are going to be interested in a player because, you know, the connection. Ruben Amorim knows him really well. He played incredible football under Amorim in a formation that Manchester United play. Clearly that their connection is there. Clearly there is an interest from United, and we do know that rather than there being club-to-club contact between United and Sporting, we don't necessarily believe that it's gone to that stage. We do know that there has been contact via intermediaries over Viktor Gyokeres, and when I say that, it will be people who might be involved in the deal, so maybe acting on behalf of Sporting, maybe acting on behalf of Manchester United, so those guys might have come together. That would suggest the really initial stages of contact between clubs over a player. So it would be, right, we've heard about release clauses, we've heard about how much they might want if there's no release clause. What kind of money is it going to take to get this deal done? It's that kind of conversation that would happen initially before United went full out and made contact with Sporting Lisbon to say, right, we want to buy the player. This is our offer. So it's that side of it is at a very early stage. And this happens a lot in transfers as well, because there are so many people involved in deals. You don't only have the player's agent, you not only have the chief executives at clubs, but you have intermediaries representing clubs as well. And sometimes that's where the initial contact starts happening. Right. And these intermediaries sometimes are employed to try and get a player X to club Y. and they will get paid if player X goes to club Y. But if that deal doesn't happen, they don't get paid. So that's how sometimes other people get involved in a certain deal. But look, there is an interest in him, and you can see why, because of the connection, like I mentioned before. But has it gone as far as club-to-club contact as we understand it at this stage? No, not yet.
Okay. I mean, the next step, I think we've got to the point where after, let's hope that Mbeumo deal can get done. Cunha's obviously already done. United need to start selling players. Is that right? Yeah. That's where we're at, isn't it? And if so, who seems to be at the top of that kind of most sellable list? Because all the players that we've got that are clearly for sale, it doesn't seem like there's loads of interest necessarily.
I mean, there's a bit of wages that have gone off the books anyway, because a few of the players in like Johnny Evans, Christian Eriksen, Victor Lindelof, they've left the club now at the end of their contracts. Clearly, United might have wanted transfer fees for them, but I mean, players like Eriksen and Evans, in their mid-30s now, so I don't know how much they would have expected anyway. But to get the wages off, it's always like a bonus anyway for a club like United to pay big wages to players anyway. But I think the situation with players departing and just generally how much United can spend, because I mean, you'll have seen it, they've been quite public about the financial issues in various interviews that Manchester United have. And the questions were always being asked that United have gone straight in and a £62.5 million Cunha. They're going for Bryan Mbeumo, who's going to be costing probably the same as Matheus Cunha, if not more. And people are asking the question, well, if they've got all these financial difficulties, how are they affording to pay for these players? Well, it's not as simple as, right, the whole of the budget goes in one pot. They will have said, right, we need to strengthen the team. That's clearly one of the biggest priorities, but we need to streamline the rest of the business. So the transfer pot might be right. We can afford, given that it's going to be a payment over terms of a contract, we can afford to get Cunha and maybe Bryan Mbeumo. That covers the budget that Manchester United have for transfers just now. Just say, for argument's sake, that's the case. Further on from that, if they want to try and bring in like a striker for big money or reinforce another position, it feels like then that departures will have to happen. But Manchester United fans knew that from the get-go anyway. And there are a lot of players who they feel can bring in enough money for them to be able to go bigger again for the remainder of the transfer window. And if you look at the players that they've targeted so far, Cunha's in, Bryan Mbeumo there's a strong interest and there's been a bid rejected. Those two players, you would think, right, they look like the number 10s that Ruben Amorim wants to play behind the striker. Now, if you look at the current United squad, which players has he been using or could be used in those number 10 positions? You're looking at the likes of Rashford, Sancho, Garnacho, and Antony, who aren't naturally going to be able to play in that position, but they would have been used in those positions rather than anywhere else on the pitch. Hence why, not only because of the positions that are being filled, but also the issues that they've had with some of these players on a personal level, look like the players that they feel, right, they can go. Rashford, we know they wanted to sell anyway. They even put an option price on it for Aston Villa, so they were more than happy for Rashford to go. They had an obligation price on Jadon Sancho, which didn't get taken up, and they made £5 million on it. Anyway, Antony, they put him on a straight loan because they wanted to raise his market value ahead of a sale in the summer, and he probably did raise his market value because he played so well for Real Betis. And Garnacho, if you remember, there was all that talk, wasn't there, about Garnacho and Kobbie Mainoo. God, they could sell these two players. That's how desperate it's become at United. But now people are looking at it and thinking, well, Garnacho, where's he going to fit in? And there's been a few issues on a personal level between the club and Garnacho, particularly after the Europa League final, when, the majority of the Manchester United squad were apologising for not winning the trophy. And Garnacho was coming out on social media saying, I've only played 20 minutes and I played the rest of the campaign. It wasn't a good look for him. And I don't think that would have helped his future as a Manchester United player. So I think those four players, I think United will look at and think we can get money for them. If you if you look at market value at the moment, you would probably think those 4 players in total would probably fetch, if they were to get the money if they could get them on permanent sales, around 125 million pounds, I would hazard.
Yeah.
If you think about Rashford, was there an option price of 40 million on him? You look at Garnacho, you probably get 40 or 50 for him potentially. There was an option price of 23 to 25 million for Sancho. And how much are you going to get for Anthony? How much would you have got for Anthony in January? Not much. He played really well for Real Betis. You're looking at 20, 25 potentially. I would say if they were to sell all of them, that would be probably the amount of money they would get. But again, it is easier said than done, Joe, because there's one thing saying, right, let's just get rid of these players and get the money in.
Yeah.
It's shown it's very, very difficult to sell these players, not least because of the wages that they're on. And what might need to happen again is, as much as United's preference is to do permanent deals for these players, they might have to consider the loan market again, particularly for players like Rashford and Sancho. I think Garnacho and Anthony might be a different proposition because they won't be on as high wages as the other two. But even then, I think there might be a window again where we'll be talking about some of these players.
Yeah, that's the tough thing. And I think when you think of United's negotiators or the people who are doing these, the transfer markets for Man United, whether that be, negotiators, whether it's scouts, whether it's the director of football or CEO, whoever's in the room doing this stuff, you always think of the fee that we get when we're buying players, get the fee down, but, spend less money. But realistically, the biggest job this window might be, as you've sort of alluded to there, getting decent money for the players that we need to leave. That's almost more important because, you said, we've sort of spent the money on Mbeumo and Cunha, and the rest of it needs to come from getting players out the door. But how do you do that when you've got players with, everyone's got an ego, so I'm not being particularly critical, but I'm sure Marcus Rashford doesn't want to just go and play for the first team that wants him. He's probably got some teams that in his there's been links with Barcelona, or that he would be keen to play for Barcelona. He's not going to want to just go to any old team that'll buy him. The same with Sancho, I'm sure. Anthony's got this great connection with Betis, but can they afford him? And then Garnacho, I think he feels like the easiest one, doesn't he? Because he's the youngest, he's probably on the lowest wages, and it's there seems to be some interest around Europe for him. But
Joe, you've got to remember as well.
You've
got to remember as well. It's not just the case of getting money for these players to fund United's transfer window for the rest of the transfer window. I think Ruben Amorim wants to sell these players to reduce the numbers of players that are going to be on the training ground, because suddenly you've got a situation where, I've lost count how many games they played in the Europa League last season. It was almost the equivalent of half a Premier League season.
Yeah.
So you're taking all of those games away. Immediately next season because there's no European football. And while that is a negative for United on a financial front, and also because they want to be playing European football, I just wonder whether for Ruben Amorim it's going to be a case of, well, I'm going to see if I can get as much of the squad that I need together in the summer, and then I've got one game a week essentially to drill into these players my formation and my style. I remember one week in last season when United went to Anfield, and a lot of people were eulogizing about United's performance at Anfield when in that 2-2 draw. Nobody expected it, but they thought that United had played really well. And if I'm not mistaken, they had a week to prepare for that game.
Yep.
I don't think there was a European game leading into that Anfield game. And I think that was a big factor because he was able to work with the players, even if it was just for 1 week. Because now it start making sense what he said when he joined, because he didn't want to join mid-season. Because effectively what ended up happening, he said, I'm going to play this formation. These players aren't used to it, but there's no point employing me if you want me to play 4 at the back. It's not me. You employed me because I was successful at Sporting playing this formation. So he was very steadfast in his ideals. And he said to United, if I'm coming now, you're going to have to take the pain for a while because I'm playing this formation. And imagine, I think now in hindsight, he's probably happy that that's happened, because imagine he'd come at the end of the season and he hadn't seen which players he wanted to keep and which ones he didn't want to keep. I think the rebuild would have taken even longer than what it potentially will do just now. It's going to take a long time now anyway. I know United fans are getting excited because immediately United have signed Cunha, and they could sign Mbeumo, and we're not even in July yet. And they're like, well, let's just get the striker in. Do they need a goalkeeper? Let's get the goalkeeper in. It's not as easy as that. I think the hierarchy have always spoken about the number of windows it will take to change what Manchester United want to do. It's going to be a slower process than people would want, but I think people need to take a step back and say the short-term approach has got to stop. And I think in a way, it has stopped with Amorim coming in.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, isn't it? It doesn't. I think people are less bothered about how long it takes, as long as there's a feeling that things are moving in the right direction. Because that's the problem with the last 10 years. It's been a couple more players and we can challenge for the title, and then it didn't work and we sacked the manager, and then a couple more, get Ronaldo in, get Varane in, we'll go for a title, didn't work, sack the manager. You know, we need to sort of accept the fact that we aren't a couple of players away from challenging for the title. We need to strip out what's, the sort of the dead wood, if you want to call it that. And
there's an interesting
rebuild.
book, actually, on as an aside. There's an interesting book I read when I was on holiday. It's completely forgotten its name. It's written by David Lyons, and it's a United biography or a Fergie biography. And throughout that, it's basically what's happened since Ferguson left. And throughout that, he used quotes from Ferguson throughout the book. And he's one of the most poignant ones was when Ferguson was like saying he was worried when the narrative coming out of United was desperate to win the next title, whereas United should be challenging not just for the next title, but are they going to be challenging for the title in 3, 4, 5 years' time? Right. It all felt really, really short term since Ferguson left, because if you look at all the managers they kept selecting, it felt like this guy will get us the next league, this guy will get us the next trophy, not this guy will take a step back, look at what needs changing throughout the club, and then build, rather like Sir Alex Ferguson was allowed to do when he joined.
Yeah, that's I've got it here. It's called Alex, the Man Behind the Legend by David Lyons. I think that's the crucial thing, isn't it? How can you set your team up so that in a dream world, obviously, not everything will go to plan, but that you're challenging for titles for a decade rather than just patching over with the 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds to win one title and then, we've got to go again. How can you make it so that your team is sustainably successful, or certainly challenging for the length of a player's career, not just the length of a couple of seasons? That's the issue, and that's where we find ourselves.
Yeah, I know United fans won't want to hear it, but the L word. I mean, it looks pretty ominous what they're doing, because it's almost like what United did at their pomp. When they were winning leagues, they were strengthening when they were right at the top. And if you see what Liverpool are trying to do in the transfer window at the moment, they spent little money last summer, then they go on and win the league. And now they're going to strengthen with £200 million plus, which they've got because they've hardly spent anything.
It's a worry, isn't it?
Sorry to end it on that.
It's a shame to end it on that, but we will end it on that. Thank you very much, Dharmesh, for coming on. We're going to be having you on regularly throughout the transfer window, as always. So it's the first of many, and hopefully next time we'll have Mbeumo wrapped up, bids chucked in for Ekitike, and we can go through all of that.
Brilliant, mate.
Cheers.
Thanks, man.
Thank you very much. Right, thank you very much for joining us. This has been a chat with Dharmesh Sheth, reporter from Sky Sports News. Get your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in a bit.